This is going to be a very personal video. I'll try to keep this kind of content to a minimum, don't worry. I really did not want to make this a spiritual channel. I have a long list of other topics to discuss, but man, you could say I feel this divine urge to talk about this stuff at this point in my life. So, on to the reasons why I can't bring myself to Christianity. Let's start out with the broad stuff. I've read too much about pre-Christian faiths and civilizations. I've researched biology, marine species, the greenish warbler that migrated around the Himalayas until it split off into two different species that met at the other end of the Himalayas and could no longer breed with each other because they were so genetically different from where they started with their common ancestor. The layers of strata where we can trace lineages, see that creatures get simpler the deeper into the earth we go, the clear evidence the earth is not thousands, but billions of years old. We found Noah's Ark, you say? Yes, we found several. You know why that doesn't surprise me? The scriptures give the exact dimensions of the ark, and such a cataclysmic event would surely prompt people to construct monuments or shrines to its memory. Let's not forget the biblical inconsistencies and terrible deeds carried out by a vengeful dictatorial God. And then Jesus comes along and is supposedly that God's son? Best evidence we have is Josephus, recorded decades later, who mentions several messiahs at that time. Jesus could have been any, none, or all of them. I respect and love the Jesus myth, but as long as he is considered the son of Yahweh, I cannot comprehend how it can possibly be true. Certainly not true enough for me to martyr myself for. And then there's my childhood. Yes, we're going there. Christianity was the worst thing about it. I never felt close to the biblical God because it all felt so distant. Whenever I thought about heaven, of eternity, even in bliss, I had anxiety attacks. At 7. That fantastical stuff in the good book led me to believe I could become a dragon someday if I really put my mind to it. And when my mom told me at the age of 10 that I can't, I was more confused than offended. After all, I was told in movies I could pursue literally any dream. And in a world of talking donkeys, people walking on water, and horsemen of the apocalypse, how was I being irrational? I tried having imaginary friends. Maybe this imagination was driven by a desire for a pet, but I digress. And I made a little bed of tissue for an imaginary leprechaun in my room to help sell the experience I had a relationship with it. I had fun adventures in my head. And what happened when my parents found out? They almost sent me to a shrink. They said my imaginary friend was demonic, burned the little bed in front of me, and told me to pray. But I never felt God's presence. I always forced myself to try since everyone around me seemed to feel it, but I never really did. I was suicidal when I was 12, and it was at a Christian summer camp I almost threw myself off a cliff. I would preach at my classmates because I thought they might go to hell. And that's all I'm going to say on my childhood. For those of you wondering, I do have great parents. They have the best relationship I've ever seen, and they raised me well. But the religion? I only like the badass parts of the Bible, like Elijah slaying the heathens after fire fell from the sky. People outside my faith seemed no different from my fellow disciples. I remember in some church sermons when I was 13, the pastor said something about, if you commit this kind of sin or hold this kind of belief, you will be called least in heaven. And I would think, what's so good about being more than anybody in heaven? I'd still be there, right? And so this kind of half-assed Christianity evolved over the course of a few years until I felt the urge to read the Bible when I was 15, and I learned the Bible might not be so infallible. I quickly became an atheist, and I felt crushed at first. I also felt a lingering fear of hellfire. But even despite that, I was emboldened by my anti-government views to stand up to injustice, even if it got me killed. I reasoned that if God was just, he would not burn people forever for not believing in him without evidence. I sure as hell hadn't seen any. In fact, what I had seen was pretty atrocious. And Jesus sacrificing himself to his own dad to save us never exactly sat right with me either. And then, of course, I educated myself on geology, biology, archaeology, and learned that the Bible is not a reliable historical source. Soon, I felt my mind was my own again. I was authentic. And you know what? If I'm being perfectly honest with myself, I occasionally do have the thought that maybe that wrathful God exists and will leave me in some hellish state after I'm dead. Even with the orthodox view that you put yourself in a state of hell, I would rather die in this state than any state I was in when I was a Christian. Except maybe very early childhood. I had some dark times since then, but I got through them without praying once. In fact, I'm grateful for those hard years. I am happy to thank the Logos for that time, and I do. I am going to a Christian Orthodox monastery soon. I've always wanted to go to one. In fact, it's a reason I would love to join Orthodoxy. Monk life seems wonderful. Do chores, pray, garden, pray, have a deep chat with the boys, pray. It's beautiful, simple. I don't doubt there's some significant spiritual truth in it, but I would need to be convinced that Christianity is the ultimate, purest truth of our existence. I have literally zero reason to believe that. I saw the myrrh streaming icon of Hawaii. I heard tales of it flowing so much that people needed multiple cups to catch the dripping myrrh, and yet when I saw it, it was simply beaded on the glass, unmoving. That was a great chance to blow my mind. I lived in a church for like 2 years. Something should have happened to convince me that God was real. I even thought up of some pretty simple miracles that could happen that would convince me. Stuff that was even less crazy than stuff I had heard of, and nothing happened. So many times. I think my draw to orthodoxy was also driven by my general distaste for modern society. You know what's kept me sane? Accepting the events as they happen, as they are meant to happen. Striving for objectivity, but recognizing the flaws of my own human senses. When I spoke to that higher consciousness, nature itself responded to my questions. The weather would literally shift in response. I did not want to quit cigars. In fact, I felt desperate not to quit them. And yet, it was the most perfect decision I could make at that most perfect moment in time. The interactions I had recently with other people where cigars played a big role, it was the perfect time to stop. God has given me so many good things, and nurtured in me a love for life. Christianity has brought anxiety and pain, and recently, with orthodoxy, envy. And I think I need to put that envy away, and admit that at this point in my life, I cannot convert to orthodoxy until my entire conception of reality, the reality that God has guided me through, is flipped on its head. A part of me continues to torture myself. What if you're wrong? Haven't I given Christianity plenty of fair chances? Being surrounded by orthodoxy, seeing the community aspect so much, the community I cannot fully relate to, it makes me feel left out. A part of me wants to convert because I love the attitude of the Orthodox people. They are so much more educated, healthier, and honestly have a better sense of humor than most Protestants I've met. Orthodoxy embodies the best qualities of Christianity. I love Orthodox philosophy. The traditions, the symbolism, the beauty. It is a religion I support, and I'm not blind to the vendetta against Orthodox people. There is a concerted effort by media and politicians to suppress Christianity, specifically Orthodoxy. I mean, Hiroshima and Nagasaki did have the highest number of Orthodox people in Japan, just saying. And that Moloch worship at the Bohemian Grove? That is some bad voodoo. But in the last couple of years specifically, I found that the Orthodox aren't much different than anyone else. They have the same amount of pitfalls and hang-ups as any atheist I've known. I will raise my religious concerns at the monastery, but I am there to simply understand the religion better, and perhaps learn more about God's character. But if I'm to trust God's process, Christianity cannot be my next step unless I witness a direct miracle that leaves zero room for doubt that it's the truth. I have heard the voice of God. I know what that voice feels like. I know where the bar's at. When I took that trip recently, I sent an invitation to whatever the most primal, godlike consciousness might be, and I got more than I expected. And it had every opportunity to send St. Lazarus to visit me. Lazarus would be my patron saint and my Orthodox name. Yes, even as an atheist, I thought about this stuff. But I need objectivity. I don't need to know everything, but I must be a student of life. I must understand how best to live well with this finite time I have here, how to be a full-fledged or optimal human being. I seek to understand my place in the universe. That requires a healthy amount of prioritization. I really want to give Christianity a fair chance, but I feel like I've strained myself too hard trying. Meanwhile, I focus on the core truths of life and I feel God. I'm even making a video on primal religion soon. You know the primary emotion Christianity has elicited from me? Anxiety. Orthodoxy specifically? Awe and respect, but also a fair dose of anxiety. What if I didn't do life right when I tried so damned hard? I know I can't be perfect, but I feel God drawing this essay out of me for a reason. I need to remain vigilant. God honed my skepticism for the last decade for a reason. and I strive to live in accordance with reality, with nature. If Yahweh exists, and he is as described in the scriptures, I beg his forgiveness, but I cannot follow his road right now. I've heard it said that the Christian God doesn't need to convince anyone of anything, that one must get involved in the church to know him. I respectfully disagree. I'm trying so hard to be humble, but if that desert God exists from that tiny pinpoint in time where all those events took place, he does need to convince me of his existence, and I need damn good evidence. Because otherwise, I feel closer to God than ever before, the most alive I've ever felt. Even before I thought of the Logos as having any kind of sentience, I felt such incredible peace. There were several periods of time I would go back and forth in my head about how Christianity could theoretically be true, but eventually, logic always took me back to the same place, and yet I would keep racking my brain about it because what if you're wrong? You know something about that trip I had when I heard from God? When I realized what I was speaking to, I was keeping an open mind to see a crazy seraph or maybe a saint. But no, it was just the elements. The perfect convergence of events, a perfect action, the consciousness of pure reality. If Jesus was the literal Son of Yahweh, I don't think either of them existed in quite the same fashion most people think of. In fact, Christianity did factor into that trip. After the hardest part of the trip was over and I was coming down, the word Christianity stood out to me in a document I was writing notes on. But nothing about the context stood out. I considered the significance of it, if Yahweh might be trying to tell me something, but it was just the word, Christianity. I took that as a sign that I would need to address my relationship to Christianity at some point. But then I got an invite to the monastery immediately after telling my family about the experience. God wants me to at least write my thoughts down. I can compute reality right now. I don't fully understand it, I never will, but I feel like I'm flowing with it. Life is good. And Christianity, as has been the case my whole life, is the source of my anxiety. I did not want to see a therapist about this because what if demons are real and fighting for my very soul? What if they have influence over the therapist? The therapist could be biased against Christianity even without demons. But I realize now after writing this that maybe a professional is in order. But I know that in the near future, I will have the funds to begin building a tiny house on the property. Just over there. I will be close to my family and I can love and help them. But I also have enough distance from the religion to see things more clearly. If I'm to convert to Christianity, it will not be in my religious environment. I know it's influencing my subconscious. I've known it for years. I hope this video doesn't strain any relationships, but I don't know who to talk to, except the people who gravitate towards my content and ideas. This kind of video should be incredibly rare. I did not want to make it, but my very sanity demands it. The sanity that God gave me. And surely, at some point during this essay, at any point, Yahweh would have given me a sign he was real, wouldn't he? If he exists, he doesn't want me to be a Christian right now. Honestly, I feel I have more to learn from Terry Pratchett or Hayao Miyazaki than Jesus right now, which also God recently put Miyazaki on my radar for some reason. God put me in this position for a reason. My life experiences happened for a reason. Perhaps it's so I might serve as some kind of cautionary tale, but I'm just trying to live my life in peace and be as objective about it as possible, to be my optimal self. If the biblical God is real, is it just to let me suffer in the afterlife given everything that's happened? I suppose. This is where the virtue of courage comes into play. And since I've found God, I've been able to relate to my fellow man more than I have in years. God really does bring people together. And I've been able to speak about deeper topics to a much wider range of people now that we share a belief in something divine. The diversity of beliefs is incredible. I don't agree with most takes, but I always walk away a little more enriched. For my entire life, I had this inkling that my life would not have a happy ending. But in the last few months, for the first time in my life, I feel like I can have a happy ending. Maybe I'll die young, but I'm less concerned about when I die. It's how and the integrity of my soul when it happens. I don't expect to make a video on my trip to the monastery, but I'll try to make the most of it and be objective about it. Thank you for listening. I just really need to put this to other minds outside of my own. Farewell.